Welcome back. You're still watching the SABC's Prime News. And many South Africans took to social media platforms at the weekend to voice their distaste of an advert by popular Swedish clothing store H&M that depicts a black child wearing a hoodie, which is a sweatshirt with a hood. That's what a hoodie is. And it had the words "coolest monkey in the jungle." Now, while the mother of the child says that she did not really see it as racist and told critics to get over it, EFF members in South Africa vandalized several stores, a Pretoria store in protest, and Afri Forum laid charges. We're now joined by the Deputy CEO of Afri Forum, Ernst Roots. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Is this about H&M or is it EFF, because you keep taking them to court?
Well, I think that's a very appropriate question because there's a distinction in terms of what this complaint is that we have filed. The complaint that we filed was not with regard to the actual vandalizing of the stores. We know that that has happened, and we know the charges has been filed against that or for that action already. So the complaint that we filed was for public incitement of violence, and we've seen that by the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema. We've seen it by the Deputy President, Floyd Shivambu, the spokesperson, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, especially on social media, but also on other public platforms.
So we've seen a lot of protests that have turned violent over the years. This is nothing new in South Africa. Why this one in particular? What makes it incitement?
Well, this one in particular is, I think what's happened, I think the EFF is misusing this ad to promote, ironically enough, their own racist political agenda. I think we can have a discussion about whether that ad is racist or not, but I think what's happening is the EFF has a particular political agenda, and I think the problem, the underlying problem here is the EFF is a populist movement, and the problem with populism is you need to keep being more and more populist or more controversial, otherwise you become irrelevant. And the EFF has now reached the point where they openly encourage people to commit crime. And you can be populist, and you can have riots, and you can have protests, but when you start encouraging people to commit crime, then you are in itself committing a crime as well. And that is something that has to be dealt with according to the law.
Do you have a view on this advert? Because, you know, black people look at this, and obviously you can understand the outrage. So why would you defend something like that?
Well, we're not defending the ad. I think there are two issues on any question of racism is what was the intent and how is it perceived. So I can't talk about how it's perceived because I'm not a black person. I think in terms of the intent, it's either one of two things. Sweden is literally one of the happiest countries in the world according to the World Happiness Index. So either this ad was published or drawn up with some sort of intention saying, how are we going to insult black people? We're going to take a black child and we're going to make this hoodie and then we're going to insult them in that way. Or they were just so oblivious to the fact that people might regard this as offensive, which is probably more evident that they were not racist. The fact that they are so oblivious to racial differences, they didn't even know that this would cause such an outcry.
But doesn't it make it worse that if you offend someone and you don't realize that you're doing it, that makes you insensitive, actually?
Yes, but I think we shouldn't necessarily judge them by South African standards. Look, I'm not here to defend the ad. I think it's a different issue. I think we should judge them by Swedish standards, and that's a complete different situation.
So H&M can defend themselves. They can go to the police, they can file charges, and they'll deal with this case. Why on earth would Afri Forum put themselves in the middle of a dispute between the EFF and H&M?
Yeah, well, this is not for us about a dispute between the EFF and H&M. For us, there's a bigger problem. The problem here is that South Africa is a violent country. Crime is a big problem in South Africa. Crime is a bigger problem than racism in South Africa, I would argue. Racism is a problem, but not as big a problem as crime and unemployment and those macroeconomic issues. And now we have a political party and three individuals in particular who are very influential, who are members of parliament, who are on public platforms actively encouraging people to commit crimes. While we have this culture of violence already. So I think that is a bigger problem that we need to be addressing. Yes, we can talk about racism, we should have discussions and debates about racism, but I think the crime issue is something that we should take more seriously.
Do you think it would help if you came out forcefully, strongly, and said, we condemn this ad, it is racist, but we don't agree with the methods of dealing with it?
Well, I think what we can do is to say that we don't think that it's racist, but whether we think it's racist or not is probably irrelevant. That we can say, because I think it's a debate that doesn't involve Afri Forum in the sense of whether that is relevant or not. I think in determining whether it's relevant, the biggest question here is how is it perceived by black people? I can't speak for black people. For me, I can stand on the sideline and comment and say, no, I don't think it's racist. But I think you would be a better judge of whether that ad is racist than I am.
Really? So that means if you were running an ad agency in South Africa, you would have signed that ad off?
I wouldn't have signed that ad off.
No, but then you can't say you don't think it's racist and then...
I can tell you why I wouldn't have signed that ad off. I don't think it's racist, but I do know that we need to be very sensitive when talking about issues of race. I'm concerned, or we as Afri Forum are concerned, that there's a double standard in terms of there's a list of things that you can say about white people or towards white people that you cannot say about black people. And I have no intention of saying those things about black people, but we are concerned that there is a double standard. I wouldn't have signed that ad off because I would have immediately seen, oh, if you publish this, people are going to say it's racist.
So shouldn't H&M have done the same? They should have known. Because not so far away, in Russia, in Italy, at football matches, the monkey chants are part of the racist culture, and they should have known. It's not like, it's in South Africa, they should have known.
I think they should have known by South African standards. I think by
world
Swedish
standards, not just
but I think by world standards maybe. I think by Swedish standards, that's a different issue. I think racism is not such a big a problem in Sweden. I think they were simply oblivious to that. But that's my opinion. I don't know. Maybe they were malicious.
Are you not worried that Afri Forum is already seen as this kind of white Afrikaans grouping, that by taking this view, you just perpetuate this perception that you're actually racist? Well,
we are going as far as to say that we are not the primary indicator to determine whether this is racist or not. I've said to you, I don't think it is. I don't think, why I'm saying this is, I don't think when that ad was drawn up, someone was sitting there in the marketing department saying, okay, how are we going to insult black people today? I think it was a faux pas. It's like a white person trying to encourage race relations and then using the term non-whites or saying some of my friends are black. It's a faux pas. You shouldn't say those type of things, but I think it's perceived differently than how it was intended. And I would acknowledge or concede that I think in a debate like this, it's more important to recognize how it's perceived than what the intention was.
Let's go back to your original point where you said that your biggest thing is that it's an incitement of violence. So then the question we have to ask is, beyond this, are you saying that if you don't nip it in the bud, that EFF are just going to go mad and just be violent everywhere? Have they shown this trend? Or are we jumping the gun a little bit here?
Well, I think the EFF has shown a trend to become more and more populist, to become more and more extreme in the type of things that they say.
But populism isn't violence, though, is it?
But populism can lead to violence. If you've said every controversial thing that you can say, the EFF now cannot remain relevant by saying the same controversial things they said 2 years ago. If they say Zupta today, it's not controversial anymore. So their whole strategy is based on being controversial, and they have to become more and more controversial. And now they've reached the point where they're encouraging people to commit violence.
Aren't you populist for Afrikaners?
Well, no, I don't think that's our strategy.
You kind of speak to things that resonate with them, and you take on causes that resonate with them.
Yeah.
So people might say you're also populist.
Well, we can debate that. I think what Afri Forum's philosophy is that minority rights, in a diverse country, minority rights is very important. We cannot say that this is a democracy, but at the same time say minorities do not have rights. I mean, if the EFF was empowered, minorities wouldn't have rights probably. So Afri Forum's whole philosophy is to say that we must create a structure through which minorities can also participate in public dialogue. We're not saying minorities should run the country, but we're saying that we cannot argue that South Africa is a democracy and at the same time argue minorities shouldn't have rights, because that's the difference between democracy and majoritarianism. And we see more and more populist leaders not understanding that there's a difference between democracy and majoritarianism.
What should have EFF done to express the outrage that we saw on social media that people are feeling? How could they have handled it differently in your view?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that the EFF could have done. I think the EFF could have really hurt H&M through legal methods. I think they could have campaigned on this, they could have protested on this, they could have initiated a boycott action, and we've seen boycott actions work. We've seen it. Last year, there was this whole issue around Spur, where a lot of people just said it wasn't necessarily a boycott action, but a lot of people were angry, and a lot of people stopped going to Spur because of a racial incident. And we've seen it repeatedly in different occasions. So I think the EFF had the ability to, within the ambit of the law, make a very strong statement. And we would have disagreed with them, but they would have had the right to do so. But encouraging people to commit violence, they do not have a right to do so.
How different is this to, we've seen protesters around the world, environmentalists, defacing buildings they see as representing all that's against capitalism, but you don't see the same kind of reaction, an independent NGO suing them for their kinds of actions, but it's also violent in its nature.
Well, we do see that, but firstly, we're not suing, so it's not a civil matter that we're taking against the EFF. We have filed criminal charges against them. So we are concerned about the fact that violence is publicly encouraged, despite the fact that there really is a culture of violence. There's an immense problem in terms of violent crime in South Africa.
But you can't have it both ways. You can't have criminal charges, because that should be H&M. If you're talking about incitement, I mean, isn't that...
No, incitement to commit a crime is a crime in itself.
Okay.
And so the EFF has these leaders have repeatedly stated, we must use violence. They've said that. Okay. They often quote Fanon, one of their influential leaders or philosophers they like to quote, who had this philosophy of why you should use violence if you're a black person. And I can't prescribe to anyone how they should protest, but I can respond if people are breaking the law.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very, very much indeed for sharing your thoughts and your insights with us. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have an opportunity to get a view of the EFF itself. Stay with us.